Hey, what's going on, everybody? So today we're going to be talking about this film that will be releasing on Shudder August 6th, and it's entitled La Llorona. Now, you may have heard that name before, may have thought you've seen this movie before, but you haven't, because this film is not that film. And that film that you're talking about is The Curse of La Llorona that came out of last year, that was a part of the Conjuring universe. But this film is totally different, and I will break it all down to you. It's a lot to kind of really put into perspective with this film, so bear with me. But nonetheless, yes, La Llorona, which will be premiering on Shudder August 6th. Now, this film has had a lot of success on the independent circuit, winning at the Venice Days Film Festival, and then obviously premiering both as official selections at TIFF and Sundance. So a lot of success there. So The Curse of La Llorona, which it's a different film, as I said. I totally enjoyed that movie. It was fun. It was entertaining, but it's completely different. It has a completely different tone than this film. The Curse of La Llorona was just a series of scare scenes and just jump scenes, all that good stuff. And then when you talk about La Llorona herself, she was a spirit who haunted children. So it was a folk tale, very creepy and eerie. But this film, La Llorona, tells a totally different story. It tackles a more in-depth and it really goes into the backstory of that folktale and actually giving it its own new twist, which I really thoroughly appreciate, which we'll talk about. And it also talks about other societal issues in Guatemala, which is another thing that I was not aware of, but this film brought to the forefront of my attention, which I thoroughly appreciated. So if you're not familiar with La Llorona, I'm going to break that down to you first before we actually talk about the film. So La Llorona is like a really well-known, popular horror legend in Latin America. It's a real thing. Even the director would tell you how, as a kid, very much affected by this. And even friends of mine was like, hey, that's nothing to be messed with. Like, as a kid, you grew up, you were just scared of this folktale. Nonetheless, this created motivation for the director to make this film. But we'll get into that. But La Llorona is about an indigenous woman who was abandoned by her husband, and she kind of just moved on with life. She had 2 sons outside of her marriage. And then she had an unexpected announcement that her husband was returning. And so for her to kind of reclaim her marital status, she drowned her 2 kids. And out of guilt, she then committed suicide because obviously she regretted what she had done. But God then punished her. And so now she is left to wander the world as a lost spirit, weeping and searching for her 2 sons. And anybody who hears her wailing is terrified by it. But unlike the legend, this story tells a little bit of a different story here. Because La Llorona is now placed into today's world, and she weeps for her children who died during the Guatemala army internal conflict. And, far from being a victim of society morality, she is a woman seeking revenge. So this is like totally different. And I think, like, to kind of put that into perspective, like, the legend speaks of it as a spirit. This film speaks of it as more of a spirit who takes possession of a person or people who all seeks vengeance because of what happened in Guatemala, which I will break down. But yeah, and with that being said too, with the film The Curse of La Llorona, you kind of like look at this as a film. That's why I said I enjoy it. It was a good film. But when you look at this film, like, it's totally different because it's practical and it's more surreal. The idea of like, hey, these are the type of things that could literally happen around you right under your nose because of the circumstances. So like it gives a whole different feel of horror to this, which I was definitely digging. So here's the thing about the film. So Alma and her kids were murdered in a Guatemalan army conflict. 30 years later, the criminal case is brought against Enrique, who is a retired general who oversaw all of the genocide that happened during this time. But he was acquitted through a mistrial, and now the spirit of La Llorona is unleashed to wander the world like a lost soul amongst the living. Now, while this is happening too, Enrique then returns back to his home. The city is in outrage. The people of the city are outraged, so they are protesting around day in and day out because tons of people, because of this genocide, are either dead, missing, or displaced. I mean, we're talking about, and this is a real thing that happened. So, you know, for the 36 years of Guatemala's civil war, I left 250,000 people dead, 40,000 missing, and some of 100,000 misplaced. But so the people are just outraged, and it's creating a lot of tension within the house, within his family, within his staff of maids, and then thus the staff of maids are like, hey, we can't do this. We have to leave. And not to mention Enrique is going through it. He's hearing things, he's hearing the crying, and it's just creating just a lot of tension within the household. But nonetheless, while all that's happening, and even, you know, his family's even having doubts of saying like, hey, maybe it's dementia, maybe it's Alzheimer's, whatever it may be. But nonetheless, since they are low on staff, a new housekeeper then is hired in Alma. But Alma is just no regular housekeeper. You're probably thinking like, Alma, you just mentioned that name. Yeah, Alma is there to seek vengeance that the trial did not. So it's not quite determined who actually is La Llorona in this film, but you get a good sense based on Alma's story that the spirit is within her. So that's the real interesting take of it. But let's kind of go over my thoughts of this film now. Now, first of all, this film is attached to Oxfam, who's providing tons of additional information and resources about Guatemala's recent history, including equality, impunity, migration from Guatemala. So a lot of good resources attached to this film because, like I said, this is a real life crisis that's happening. And then, you know, this film does highlight a lot of the corruption in Guatemala. So from the director's point of view, you know, he grew up as a child fearing La Llorona, as I spoke about, and he took this opportunity to create a new version. But at the same time, too, because he's speaking through his experience, he's also talking about everything that was happening in Guatemala, and he took a really unique approach in order to compile a story of both a legend that he grew up fearing, but also just the horror and the genocide that was happening in Guatemala. And not to mention, too, whenever you're taking a civil stance and speaking about social injustice, you know, there's always a sense of like a fear because you could be killed for speaking up, especially within his country. So there's a lot that goes on to that. But I really do appreciate the director's stance on this because he really talks about this dark history and you know, and really taking into account true events and so on, and it sheds a light into something that really should have more attention on. But yeah, ultimately this story is about the killings of the armed conflict in Guatemala, which was kind of covered up by the president, and then really, you know, going about the genocide and the crimes against humanity and the domestic and sexual slavery of the native women. It's just a really lot that goes on. There's some really powerful scenes that happen in this movie. So you got to think you're giving a lot of emotion throughout this film because you're giving some things that really touches you in a way because you know it's real. But at the same time too, you're also realizing that you're watching a horror film. But the horror ain't really just the legend. It's really the idea of the history of this country. But nonetheless, I'll be 100% with you here. The end of the movie is everything that you probably think you were going to get based on the curse of La Llorona. You will get that jump scare tactics and that other stuff. It does happen, but majority of the movie is not focused on that. It's focused on this new version of La Llorona created by the director that puts her into this day and age, but also speaking about all the horrors within the country of Guatemala. So it's a really good film. I definitely suggest check it out. I've already spoken enough about the accolades that it's already received, and it's just only a couple of days away now until you can watch it on Shudder, and it's a really good film. So let me know in the comments of what you think, whatever thoughts you have about it, and absolutely do more research on it, because there's a lot of stuff about this out there, and also for just doing a good job of providing resources and details about it. So, but yes, La Llorona is available August 6th on Shudder. Thank you for watching this review. Catch you for the next one very soon. Big gold bell.